There's only food for real family members here. At my father-in-law's birthday celebration, my mother-in-law placed an empty dog bowl in front of me with those words. As I stood there, speechless from shock, she looked down at me with obvious delight. Next to her sat my father-in-law, indifferent as always to everything around him. And beside me was my husband, wearing an expression of pure annoyance. At this table for four, I felt utterly alone. The people I had thought were my family were never really family at all. Don't act like you're family just because you've given us a little financial help. My mother-in-law's eyes burned with hostility towards me. I didn't know what to do anymore. I never intended to act superior about providing financial assistance. I had only tried to help as family when my mother-in-law and husband asked me to. Yet my husband, who had promised to protect me if anything happened, wouldn't say a word. Was he trying to suggest it was my fault that his mother disliked me? Even a dog has more charm than you. My mother-in-law's attacks were relentless. What should have been a joyful birthday party had turned into hellish hours that felt endless. I couldn't take it anymore. I'd reached my limit. With that thought, I finally made my decision. I understand. Since I'm no longer family, I'll stop everything. I'm Demi, 30 years old. My parents passed away in a car accident when I was 21, and I spent my 20s focused entirely on work, desperately trying to make it through. When my parents died, I was still in college. Though I felt crushed by loneliness and anxiety, I had to stay strong for my younger sister, who was 3 years my junior. I couldn't allow myself to wallow in grief. Thanks to insurance money and the inheritance my parents left behind, I managed to graduate from college. After getting a job, I worked single-mindedly, always putting my sister's college tuition first. My sister successfully found employment, and last year she told me she was engaged to her college boyfriend. What she said to me then really struck home. It's time you thought about your own happiness too. She had a point. I was already 30. While I hadn't had many opportunities to meet people due to focusing on work, I wanted to build a warm home like my parents had. With that in mind, I started attending matchmaking parties. At first, I didn't meet anyone special, but at my third party, I met a man with whom I felt an instant connection, and we both realized we were interested in each other. His name was Win, a salaried employee at a mid-sized company, and I was impressed by his kind and sincere demeanor. Conversation flowed naturally from the start, and after exchanging contact information, our relationship progressed smoothly. About 6 months later, Win proposed, and we got married. I was very happy, but there was one thing that worried me, my mother-in-law. From our first meeting, I had a feeling things wouldn't go well with her. When she learned that I worked at a smaller company than Win's and held no management position, she openly looked down on me. With a company that small, your salary must be quite low. How difficult for you. And with no parents to rely on, you must not be destined for wealth. How fortunate you are to marry my son. I can still vividly remember her fake sympathetic expression when she said those words. But at that time, Win stepped in, saying, "Mom, that's not a nice way to talk." And in front of his sulking mother, he turned to me and said, "I'm sorry. Are you okay?" His kindness saved me. helping me get through that awkward time with his mother. On our way home that day, Win promised again, "I'm sorry you had to go through that today. Next time Mom says anything cruel to you, I'll definitely stop her." At the time, I felt blessed, knowing that while many women struggle with mother-in-law issues, I had a husband who would take my side. However, my mother-in-law proved to be far more difficult and troublesome than I had imagined. Shortly after our first meeting, she began contacting me frequently. "You're free right now, aren't you? Come over," she would call and say, claiming she couldn't go out because her knee hurt and needed me to do her shopping. At first, I did as she asked, but soon she started calling me over for other things too: gardening, cleaning the bathroom, and various other chores. It became quite burdensome. After all, I had my own job. I couldn't spend all my time doing things for my mother-in-law. Besides, for someone who complained about knee pain, she seemed remarkably spry, walking around the house without any apparent difficulty. Sometimes I would run into my father-in-law when doing these errands in the late afternoon, but he would barely acknowledge me with a brief greeting. According to Win, his father had never shown much interest in family matters. Perhaps he hadn't even noticed that his wife was constantly calling me over to do chores. Even during our first meeting, my father-in-law had radiated an aura of wanting to get it over with quickly. He might not have cared about my existence or even his son's marriage. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law constantly wanted to talk with Win, often having long phone conversations late into the night. Apparently, she talked about me too, because one day Win said, "It seems you're getting along well with Mom. She's really happy about that." Thank you. Though I suspected my mother-in-law was twisting things to her advantage, I chose not to contradict him. Win seemed to have stronger feelings for his mother, who always showed concern for him, than for his father, who paid little attention to family matters. His way of talking made it clear how much he cherished his mother. That's why I felt hesitant to speak up. However, taking advantage of this, my mother-in-law's behavior escalated increasingly. Under the pretext of maintaining good mother-in-law/daughter-in-law relations, she continued to summon me to her house frequently. She started pushing all sorts of tasks onto me: cleaning, laundry, dinner preparation, and shopping for groceries and daily necessities. She would make excuses about feeling under the weather or having back pain, but she always seemed energetic enough to watch TV dramas and shopping channels, keeping herself quite busy in her own way. I finally decided I couldn't keep up with this anymore and tried several times to refuse, citing work commitments, but my mother-in-law wouldn't back down. "Then come after work. Or in the morning, I'm an early riser," she would say matter-of-factly. Her thick-skinned attitude was astounding. However, my physical and mental endurance had reached its limit, and one day I finally discussed the situation with Win. He seemed to have completely believed his mother's version of events, responding with surprise and skepticism. "Really? Are you sure?" Then, trying to placate me, he said, "Mom's been a housewife all her life and loves housework. Maybe she's just trying to teach you things." I tried again to explain how his mother just lounged in the living room all day, but Win just kept shaking his head in disbelief. He seemed unable to reconcile the mother I was describing with the mother he knew. Apparently, his mother had been careful to maintain her image as a good mother in front of her son. Realizing no amount of explanation would get through to him, I gave up on relying on Win for help. Still, I couldn't continue being used as a housekeeper at his mother's whim. I had my own job to focus on, plus household duties to take care of in support of my husband. The next day, having made up my mind, I clearly told my mother-in-law when she called, "I'm sorry, but I have a job too, so I can't always come over. I'll help when you're really in need, but could you please stop calling so frequently?" On the phone, my mother-in-law was clearly displeased, but perhaps my firm tone got through to her, as she just spat out, "Oh, really?" and didn't argue further. After that, she stopped summoning me to her house, but she had a new strategy up her sleeve, requesting financial assistance. "Hey, could you help me out with some money?" The first time she called and asked this, I couldn't believe my ears. Her tone was so casual that I almost thought she was joking. "What's this about all of a sudden?" I tried to ask about the circumstances, but she just replied casually, "Well, life is hard, you know." While I was still trying to figure out how to respond, she started speaking quickly, as if making excuses. "You know how expensive everything is these days, right? And my husband's salary suddenly dropped, so we're really short on living expenses. Plus, I have problems with my back and knees, so I need to go to the doctor." It's true. If we cut back any more on household expenses, I might get sick. But you're too busy to come help out, aren't you? This is terrible. If anything happens to me, Win will worry. So couldn't you spare maybe $200 or $300? I'd need to discuss money matters with Win. When I said this, my mother-in-law immediately cut me off with, "That won't do." Then, in a lower voice, she continued, "Wouldn't that just make him worry unnecessarily? So don't tell him anything about this. Don't you think you're lacking awareness of your role as his wife? Would any normal person want to cause extra worry for their hardworking husband? Besides, I'm the one in need here. Surely you can manage $300? I don't see why you'd even hesitate." Her attitude hardly seemed appropriate for someone asking for financial help, but I felt that refusing would only make things more complicated. Plus, I couldn't bear the thought of her starting to contact me frequently again. With these thoughts in mind, I swallowed my misgivings and agreed. "All right, I'll give you $300. "Oh, will you? That's such a help." My mother-in-law seemed satisfied with my answer and said she'd come right over to get it. True to her word, she arrived at my house 30 minutes after hanging up. Though I wanted to say something about how healthy she looked, I held my tongue. "Please understand this is a one-time thing," I said as I handed over the $300. She practically snatched it and quickly tucked it into her wallet. "Of course I understand. Don't talk like I've asked multiple times when this is the first time." Her smile vanished the moment she got the money, and with a final snort, she left. As I watched her walk away, I had an uneasy feeling, which proved entirely correct. The very next week, she called again with exactly the same tone and request, asking for another $300. "Mother-in-law, didn't you say this would be just once?" I reminded her, and she immediately pursed her lips. "What's with that attitude? I'm telling you we're struggling to make ends meet. What if I get sick and can't move? Are you going to come nurse me every day? You can't, right? How cold-hearted you are. You don't have time to nurse me, but you won't even help with a little money. Her bitter complaints, which felt like misdirected anger, went on and on. And incredibly, she even started negotiating. Well, how about $250 then? Though it wasn't about the amount, she persisted, lowering her request to $200. If I kept refusing, I knew we'd just keep going through this cycle of complaints and negotiations. Reluctantly, I agreed to help again. However, the following week, her calls for financial assistance continued, always when Win wasn't around, so he remained completely unaware of these transactions. This pattern continued until the aid amounted to nearly $1,000. Finally, feeling I couldn't stay silent anymore, I discussed these weekly calls with Win one night. He responded with an apologetic expression, saying, "I'm sorry, but could you please do as Mom asks?" When I asked why, he revealed that he had borrowed money from his mother when entering private university. At the time, his father had opposed sending him to an expensive private school, but Win's academic performance wasn't strong enough for public universities. His mother had persistently convinced his father by offering to help with her savings, and they eventually agreed to let him borrow the money. Apparently, he still hadn't repaid that loan. This sense of obligation seemed to prevent him from standing up to his mother. Then he said, "Family should help each other, right? You're an important part of my family now, so please, I'm sorry, but I'm asking you." Though I felt nothing but distrust toward his mother's phone manner, seeing my husband's apologetic face and earnest plea made me reconsider and try to understand his feelings. "All right, just this once." "Thank you." Seeing his face light up, I managed a reluctant smile in return. However, the financial assistance never ended. Having gotten a taste for borrowing money from me, my mother-in-law began asking for money almost every week. She even started calling twice a week, with the frequency definitely increasing. She seemed to have set some sort of target amount. If one week was low, she'd demand more the next week to make up for it. Last month it was $900, and this month it's already reached $1,200. When it exceeded $1,000, I consulted Win again. "Hey, your mother keeps asking for money, saying it's for hospital bills. Does she have any chronic conditions?" Win, munching on his dinner, answered absently, "I wonder. Could you maybe ask your mother about it? The amount has gone over $1,000 this month, and normal medical bills shouldn't cost that much, right?" "I'll ask her sometime," Win said, but he apparently never did. In fact, every time I brought up the financial assistance, he'd just say, "Well, let it slide just this once," and escape the conversation. So nothing changed except the mounting total of financial aid. Once he even said, "See? It was less than last month," and walked away with a light laugh. This made any real discussion impossible. Moreover, he gradually started making annoyed faces and avoiding the topic whenever I tried to consult him about it. This continued for 10 months, with me continuously providing money to my mother-in-law. However, a decisive event occurred between my mother-in-law and me soon after. It happened when she unusually called me about something other than asking for money. She was planning a birthday dinner for my father-in-law. Demi, you must come too, she said in an uncharacteristically cheerful voice. Though I honestly wasn't eager to go, I thought I should accept since she had invited me. So on the day of the dinner, I went to my in-laws' house with Win. My mother-in-law greeted us with a broad smile. I put extra effort into cooking today since the whole family will be together, she hummed, leading us to the dining table. Indeed, an extravagant meal was laid out, as if we were at a high-end restaurant. However, I immediately noticed something off about the table. One of the 4 place settings was clearly different from the others. That seat had no food or wine glass, just an empty dog bowl. It was a bizarrely unsettling sight. My mother-in-law, clearly enjoying my reaction, pointed to the dog bowl and said, "Demi, that's your seat." Her broad smile now seemed terribly distorted. I felt a chill run down my spine. As I stood there shocked, she hurriedly whispered through suppressed laughter, "Quick, sit down before your husband comes." Internally, I looked to Win for help, but he avoided eye contact and quickly took his own seat. He seemed to be pretending not to notice the dog bowl. Though I couldn't believe this was happening, I had no choice but to sit down. My mother-in-law nodded with satisfaction and began speaking, "I've only prepared food for real family members." That's natural, isn't it? I had no idea what was natural about this situation. But she continued, "It's such a nuisance when you act like family just because you've given us a little financial help. Who do you think you are, interrogating me every time about how I use the money?" Did she really consider monthly assistance of $1,000 just a little financial help? If so, our sense of money values was completely different. I realized I could never keep up with their mindset. Someone as charmless as you should be grateful to even be treated like a dog. Just as my mother-in-law finished speaking, my father-in-law appeared at the table. He must have heard our exchange, but as always, he remained indifferent and took his seat without even glancing at me. "Well, now that our guest of honor is here, let's start the party." My mother-in-law's cheerful voice grated on my ears. Unable to contain myself any longer, I stood up and said, "I'm leaving." "Oh? Leaving before we even start?" Only my mother-in-law responded. Neither my father-in-law nor Win would even look at me. Looking down at my husband, who continued to pretend nothing was wrong, I said, "So you're just going to pretend you don't see your mother's financial demands and this harassment? You just say whatever's convenient and end up doing whatever she wants. I guess unlike me, you must be such an adorable little dog to her." Win finally looked up at this, but seemed unable to find any words and remained silent. Instead, my mother-in-law began arguing back furiously. I left my in-laws' house with her verbal abuse following me out. I'd said everything I needed to say, there was nothing left to regret. Several hours after I returned home, Win came back. He apparently didn't want to make eye contact with me even at home and tried to head straight to the bathroom. I called out to his retreating back, "I can't take this anymore. If you're going to keep acting like this, I don't have any confidence left. I want a divorce." Though I'd said this after much thought and deliberation, Win's response was surprisingly casual. "Okay," he said, as if I just asked to leave the house for a while. He seemed to change his mind about the bathroom and sat on the living room sofa, scratching his head in annoyance. Since this is the end, let me tell you something. Isn't it partly your fault that things got this bad with Mom? You kept coming to me for consultation every time something happened, but that's not right, is it? As a wife, you should have worked things out woman to woman. In other words, Win had just found it all troublesome. He had never intended to do anything about it himself and had apparently found my concerns irritating. Now that this was clear, my resolve was firm. As if a switch had flipped in my mind, I stood up and quickly packed my things. I'll come back for the rest of my belongings later. I'll leave the house key and divorce papers on the table then, I told Win. He seemed a bit taken aback by my transformation, but nodded as if intimidated. I added one final word to Win, since I won't be family anymore, tell your mother I won't be providing any more financial assistance. About that. I ignored Win's pathetic voice as I walked out of the house. A few weeks later, my mother-in-law suddenly called. "Hey, Demi, what did you do to my son?" she demanded in a desperate voice. I calmly asked, "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb." Win came to me saying he's struggling financially. He seemed to be doing fine before, so why did this happen right after you left? You didn't make up some false accusations about him cheating and demand compensation money, did you? I would never do something like that. Just ask him yourself. I sighed deeply in exasperation. I could easily guess why Win was struggling financially. Since my mother-in-law wouldn't understand otherwise, I decided to explain. Of course he's struggling if he tries to maintain the same lifestyle as when I was there. What? What do you mean? My mother-in-law snapped back aggressively. I was covering most of our household expenses. What are you talking about? How could a poor person like you have been paying for anything? My mother-in-law snickered. I suppose her reaction was natural. I had never clearly explained this to either my mother-in-law or Win, because I didn't want them relying on me even more for money. Both mother and son had such warped views about money that they would just buy whatever they wanted. I had noticed that my mother-in-law was using my financial assistance frivolously. Her house was overflowing with merchandise from her favorite artists, and in her phone calls with Win, she would happily talk about going to concerts and beauty treatments. Win spent most of his weekends pursuing his baseball hobby, passionately collecting merchandise and autographed balls. His income alone could never have supported our household. But because I loved Win, I thought we could manage the household finances together, so I had silently accepted his spending habits. However, my income wasn't as modest as they thought. Actually, alongside my company job, I had a fairly stable income as a blogger. Win assumed I was just doing some work-from-home side job for pocket money, but in reality, my blogging income was more than 5 times my company's salary. I had started blogging shortly after my parents died, looking for a way to earn money without quitting school. Starting with trial and error, I gradually built up my experience, and now I'm thankful to have many followers. This has resulted in steady advertising revenue. You mean, you weren't poor? My mother-in-law muttered in disbelief over the phone. She had apparently believed Win's income was higher than mine. I could never understand how she could so casually ask for money while thinking I was poor. Though I was deeply dissatisfied knowing how she had probably spent the money, I had somewhat sympathized with Wynn's feelings toward his mother and the idea that family should help each other. To be honest, I had envied Wynn for still being able to do things for his parents. I no longer had parents to show filial piety to, which was partly why I, who had more financial flexibility than Wynn, had ended up helping his mother. I was completely wrong about you. I'm sorry. So you were wealthy all along. My mother-in-law's voice suddenly brightened inappropriately. Her next words were exactly what I had expected. Wynn and I are really struggling right now. Could you help us? Just $5,000 would be fine for now. I responded coldly, making sure she would understand. What exactly are you misunderstanding? This is all in the past now, from when we were family, even if only superficially. You're no longer family, just a stranger. Therefore, I have no obligation to help you. Though it seems you never considered me family in the first place. Having grown thoroughly sick of my mother-in-law's selfish attitude, I couldn't help adding that last barb. However, rather than getting angry as usual, my mother-in-law was frantically panicking on the other end of the line. That's not true. I didn't mean it that way. I'll apologize if I've offended you. So please, about the money. Her desperate manner suggested they were in dire financial straits. While I felt some sympathy, I had no obligation to help a woman who had laughed while putting out a dog bowl for me. I'm sorry, but I'm busy with work, so I'm hanging up now, I said, quietly ending the call while hearing my mother-in-law's voice trying to continue the conversation in the background. However, the next day, Wynn called. My mother-in-law had apparently run crying to him. According to Wynn, after losing me as a resource, his mother had started demanding money from him instead. She's asking for money every day, and I'm at my wit's end. Please. Just help us this once. I could imagine Wynn's desperate face on the other end of the phone. I felt nostalgic remembering how he used to beg like this and then show that bright smile afterward. I can't say I felt no sympathy for him at that moment. But this time, I had decided to think about my own happiness. There's no such convenient arrangement. When I was struggling, you just made an annoyed face and did nothing. Didn't you just say inappropriate things like work it out woman to woman and family should help each other? Well, now's the time for that. Help each other as real family. Since I'm not family anymore, it's pointless to keep calling no matter how many times you ask. Even as Wynn tried to continue pleading, I cut him off by hanging up. After that, both Wynn and his mother called several more times, but I ignored them all. I thought they would finally give up, but months later, they took desperate action that I never could have imagined. The incident happened on a regular weekday. When I arrived at work as usual, I saw two people arguing with the security guards in front of the company. I couldn't believe my eyes when I realized the pair was Wynn and his mother. They were insisting they were my family and demanding the guards let them see me. Their appearance was shockingly unkempt, looking as if they hadn't even had the energy to fix their hair. They seemed so unapproachable that I thought they might even smell bad if I got too close. Their appearance clearly showed how financially desperate they must be. That's probably why both of them had come to my workplace. This parent and child had completely lost it. While I felt sorry for the security guards, I wanted to avoid getting involved in this mess. But then Win suddenly turned around, spotted me, and called out my name loudly as he approached. His mother hurriedly followed. Before I could say anything, Win blurted out something incredible. "Demi, I was wrong. I've changed my ways, so please marry me again." I felt my heart grow cold. I couldn't imagine a more unpleasant proposal. "What are you talking about? That's never going to happen." I cut off his foolish proposal and tried to enter the building, considering the matter closed. "Wait. At least hear us out." Win and his mother shouted simultaneously. Though I was thoroughly fed up, they began explaining their current predicament. According to them, even after I left, Win couldn't change his lifestyle and fell into a debt trap from overusing credit cards. The same was true for his mother. Having gotten used to my financial assistance, her sense of money had completely deteriorated. They had both exhausted their savings. When Win's father finally noticed his mother's wasteful spending through credit card bills, he gave up on her and demanded a divorce. By then, both mother and son had realized they couldn't get any more money from me and weren't thinking clearly, so his father's divorce declaration made them explode emotionally. At first, mother and son desperately clung to his father, begging him to reconsider the divorce, but his resolve was firm. As the three argued, tensions escalated until they were shouting at each other. In the commotion, his father fell and was seriously injured. He was currently hospitalized. Moreover, some illness was discovered while he was in the hospital, so the divorce was temporarily put on hold. However, this hadn't improved their situation. With his father's medical bills likely to increase, the household would continue to struggle financially. It must have been a truly desperate situation. Mother and son looked at me imploringly, begging, "Please help us just this once." I sighed deeply. I wondered how this parent and child could be so self-centered in their thinking. No, it was pointless to even question it. They would never understand. Ignoring Win, who only ever did what his mother said, I addressed her directly. "You once told me not to act like family, remember? Since you never considered me real family in the first place, I have no obligation to help you, right? I'll return those words to you now. Don't act like family after all this time." My mother-in-law stood dumbfounded, seemingly unable to find words. When I tried to walk past them, they still attempted to cling to me. Finally, I had to say, "If you keep making a scene, I'll call the police," showing them my phone with the number displayed. This finally had an effect. The two hurriedly left, muttering under their breath. I apologized to the security guards for the disturbance and finally entered the office. This incident seemed to have taught them their lesson, as neither my mother-in-law nor Win tried to cling to me again. I heard through the grapevine that after his father recovered somewhat, he again demanded a divorce from his mother. This time, abandoned by his father for good, mother and son had no choice but to declare bankruptcy. The once close parent and child now apparently spend their days just arguing about each other's wasteful habits. As for me, I'm continuing my dual career as a company employee and blogger, determined to focus on my work. While I still dream of a happy family, I've realized there's no point in rushing into marriage. Though my ex-husband turned out to be worthless in the end, thanks to him, I realized this truth. As a result of focusing on my work, I'm happy to announce that my blog will be published as a book. Actually, I've been keeping in touch with a man I met during the publishing meetings. We really hit it off. He's asked me out, and we're planning to go on a date soon. Maybe taking the pressure off myself worked out for the best. From now on, I intend to enjoy both work and my private life in my own way. I've taken my first step toward a new future.